never imagined I'd end up here, facing a truth that swallows you whole, long before you ever find the strength to speak it. My name is Claire, and for most of my marriage, I believed I knew what love looked like. Not the wild kind filled with fireworks and chaos, but the gentler sort, the kind built quietly, through tiny kindnesses, familiar routines, silent forgiveness, and a mug of coffee waiting on the counter every morning. But lately the quiet between Ethan and me had grown heavy, weighted with something neither of us seemed willing to confront. It began about a year ago, right after Ethan lost his job. He unraveled slowly. The man who once laughed without effort started watching me with guarded eyes, noting every time I glanced at my phone, every pause in my replies. He looked like someone trying to grab hold of anything he could, because everything else in his world felt like it was slipping through his fingers. Money tightened, and our emotions tightened even more. I picked up extra hours at the clinic to keep us steady. The days blurred into a haze of exhaustion and simmering resentment, that dangerous edge where affection starts turning into obligation. That's when Ryan stepped into my life, a doctor I worked alongside. He was self-assured, charismatic, the kind of man who listens as if every word carries weight. At first it was nothing serious. Lunch breaks, quick jokes between patients, the small bond forged between co-workers who are worn thin. But one night, after a brutal shift, he offered to drive me home, and that night became something I wish I could undo. He kissed me and I froze, not because I was shocked, but because I felt something I hadn't felt in months, something I had been craving. I didn't stop him. I should have. But loneliness reshapes your judgment until it masquerades as need. The guilt hit me the next morning, sharp, suffocating, relentless. I swore it was a one-time lapse, something I could bury beneath work and silence. But Ryan refused to let it disappear. He kept calling, texting, finding excuses to linger near me. Whenever Ethan wasn't around, he'd murmur things like, "You deserve to feel alive again." And for a while, I convinced myself he was right. Then everything shifted. The softness in his words calcified into control. His messages turned from affection into veiled commands. "You owe me, Claire. Remember, I protected you that night." That was when I finally saw him clearly. He wasn't giving me freedom. He was trapping me in a different kind of cage. I wanted to end it, but he threatened to tell Ethan. So I stayed, not out of desire, but out of fear. Each encounter hollowed me out further, leaving me disconnected from the woman I once was. Then came the night Ethan came home early. I was at the kitchen table, trembling, trying desperately to text Ryan to stop. Ethan walked in, saw my panic, and instantly knew something was wrong. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse. He just sat across from me and asked softly, "Claire, is there something you need to tell me?" That question shattered me. Everything I had held inside came spilling out. Every mistake, every justification, every weak moment. I told him all of it. How it started, how it grew, how fear and shame carved me into someone I barely recognized. And then I admitted the hardest part, that I hadn't stayed with Ryan because I wanted him, but because I believed I had no choice. Ethan didn't flinch. He didn't rage. He just stared at me, searching for the woman he married in someone he no longer knew. And after a long, unbearable pause, he said quietly, "You didn't have to stay, Claire. You chose to." It wasn't anger in his voice that broke me. It was how steady he was, painfully, impossibly steady. And that calmness wounded me more than yelling ever could, because he was right. Beneath all the fear, beneath the guilt, there had been a choice. And that truth was devastating. He stood, walked to the window, and spoke in a low, cutting tone. "If it had been a mistake, I could have forgiven you," he said. "But this wasn't a mistake. It was a silence you nurtured and paid for." Then he left. No slammed door, no harsh words, just the fading sound of his footsteps down the hallway, leaving behind a stillness that refused to lift. The weeks that followed felt empty. Ryan kept calling, but I ignored every attempt. I resigned from the clinic and moved in with my sister, trying to shrink my life into something manageable. I wrote letters to Ethan, not to beg for forgiveness, but to explain that fear doesn't erase betrayal. It only disguises it. He never responded. Months later, I saw him by chance, in the grocery store. He looked older, calmer, like someone who had finally put down a weight he'd carried too long. When our eyes met, I froze. Every instinct told me to turn away, but he offered a faint smile. Gentle, sad, familiar. We stood there in the hum of freezers, two strangers bound by our past. "I read your letters," he said at last. My throat tightened. Then he added softly, "I understand now. You were afraid, but fear doesn't erase love. It only changes what it becomes." My eyes stung. "Do you hate me?" I whispered. He shook his head. "No, but I can't love you the way I did before. Some things don't go back to whole. You just learn to live around the fractures." That was the last time I saw him. Still at night, His voice echoes in my mind, steady, quiet, mercilessly honest. You didn't have to. You chose to. It's a truth that still shapes me. I've learned that choices born of fear might feel like survival, but they slowly corrode you from the inside. I don't know if Ethan found peace. I hope he did. He deserves the calm I never gave him. As for me, I'm learning to forgive the version of myself who believed silence was safer than truth. If I could return to that moment, I wouldn't plead for forgiveness. I'd plead for courage. The courage to speak before the damage spread, to walk away before I broke what mattered, to reach out before I pushed everything I loved into distance. Life doesn't offer rewinds. It leaves echoes. And in mine, his voice still lingers, steady, soft, unforgettable. You didn't have to. You chose to.